Larry Hedrick here for Mysteries of Superstition Mountain. Today we have a special Christmas miracle story by David Jones.
Today I'd like to tell you a personal story that happened within the shadows of the Superstition Mountains. Now this is a Christmas miracle story, and it happened in the mid-1800s. Not to me, but to my direct grandfather. Not my first great grandfather. We'll get into that in just a second. But the bottom line is, this story is very personal to me, and I think you'll enjoy it. And first off, I need to let you know how I found out about this story, because it is a family story. My great-grandmother and my grandmother, I used to go and live with them during the summer for a couple years, and there was always this golden bronze, or it was kind of a weird statue on the piano, and I would always say, "Grandma, Grandma, great-grandma, what is that?" And they would go, "That reminds us of our grandfather." And I go, "What?" So, as little kids do, I would bug them, and finally they said, "That reminds us of Matthew Caldwell." Now, Matthew Caldwell was my great-grandmother's great-grandfather. The great thing for people like myself, he wrote journals, and he wrote really good journals. So I would like to share with you a Christmas miracle that happened to him just in the shadow of the Superstition Mountains in the mid-1800s. Now, Matthew Caldwell was sympathetic to the LDS Church, or the Mormon Church back then, and he wasn't a member, but after the Saints were driven out of Illinois and Missouri and they were stuck at Council Bluffs, Brigham Young came to him and basically asked him if he would join the church. And guess what? He said yes. And within a few weeks, he was a member of the church. And then immediately after that, he signed up to be a member of the Mormon Battalion. Now, if you don't know who the Mormon Battalion is, it was a group of Mormons who were enlisted into the U.S. military for the Spanish and American War. Now, they proceeded to go on one of the longest marches by foot in almost military history. And it's a pretty amazing story, but we don't have time to get into all that today. Basically, what I'd like to tell you is his miracle, how he survived in the desert south of the Superstition Mountains. Now, after the Mormon Battalion had approached Tucson and the Spanish fled, they just ran away. They didn't get into any kind of fight with them. They were all spread out. They were tired. They'd been marching for months. They were marching on very low rations, very tough conditions, and I'm talking extremely tough conditions. If anybody can imagine walking through the Arizona desert with no shoes, that's what these people were at that time. They had gone so far that they just worn out their clothes. Their clothes were threadbare. Most of them didn't have shoes. My grandfather actually bought a pelt from some Indians. There was an antelope pelt, and he made himself a pair of breeches. And that is the reason that statue on my grandmother's piano all those years reminded them of Matthew Caldwell, because he made himself a pair of breeches out of, he called them breeches, but breeches out of this antelope skin. And when they were wet, those pants would go all the way to the ground. And when they would dry, they'd come up to his knees. And that statue, the golden statue that reminded them of that, was this bust of a guy wearing knee, like cut off at the knee pants, picking grapes, and it just reminded them of him. But to let you know how I got involved in that is I kept asking him questions, and finally my grandmother, being smart that she was, she told me a little of the story, just teased me enough to get my interest. And then after that, she found his journal and she read to me a synopsis, a shortened version of the journals, because they're very long, and put it on cassette tape for me, because it was just an amazing story of what those people went through on that battalion march. It was just incredible. But back to the story. So they're marching back from Tucson, heading north towards the Superstition Mountains before they head west to San Diego. And they come upon the Pima village. And at that Pima village, Matthew Caldwell made friends with one of the elderly women there, and he was able to purchase or trade, I guess they traded buttons and a lot of things because the Indians are really interested in them, for some cornmeal. And he absolutely loved cornmeal muffins that his wife used to make for him. And so he bought this cornmeal, and he found a metate somewhere, and he ground it up and added some water and made the mix kind of like his wife did, and heated up a fire, put them on the rocks, and made himself some cornmeal muffins. And he was in heaven. That was his favorite food. He was able to get onto it because they have been just deprived of nutrition through this whole trip. They were on half rations, and then they didn't have enough rations. It just went on and on and on. They even told one story about when an animal in the troop would die, everybody would come by and take a piece of meat as they went by, and by the end of the day, that animal was back in the camp, and that's what they were eating because they just did not have any food. It was very, very deprived. So he ate this corn muffin. I should say muffins. He had a bunch of them. He probably gorged himself and he had not been able to do that in months. And it had a very adverse reaction. His stomach just became on fire, and he knew he was in a lot of trouble. I mean, a lot of trouble. He knew that the troop was going to leave the next day, and they would leave him behind if he couldn't get going. So what he did is he left ahead of the troop of the Mormon Battalion, and he sauntered off into the desert on his own. And this whole time he is throwing up, he's having diarrhea, he's getting really sicker and sicker and getting dehydrated. And finally he gets a little ways and he just passes out. And he talks about crawling underneath what I would think is a greasewood or something like that, a tumbleweeds that we have out there in the desert, those low gritty plants, the mesquites or whatever. And he crawls underneath there and just thinking he is gonna die. And he knows he'll die if the troop comes past him and leaves him behind, because it's the middle of nowhere and no one's coming for him. So he laid there and having all kinds of distress. And at this time, he talks about how he was struggling. He thinks he's going to die. He might die. He knows that he's been given a promise that, as many of all the troops in the Mormon Battalion were given, that they would not die in battle. They would not die. They would make it. And he's having a challenge of his faith, and he's dying. And eventually, he's woken up in a start by one of the people who follow the end of the battalion, cleaning up the rear guard, I guess is what it's called. They kick him and said, "Get up on your feet." And he couldn't do it. And this particular person was one of the ones that wasn't a Mormon or a member of the church, wasn't really friendly to them. They were kind of treated kind of badly. And kicked him and basically says, "Well, you better get on your feet and catch up with us or you'll die out here in the desert," and just left him. And he's laying there thinking that the world is to end for him. And he gets this feeling deep in his heart, knowing that, that he's been made some promises. He's thinking about his family. He knows it's going to be really tough. What is he going to do if he dies in the desert? What is his family going to do and his children who are waiting for him? And he gets this feeling that it'll be okay. And then he opens his eyes and looks up, and there's an Indian on a horse. It was a Pima Indian. He describes him as what I would call a medicine man. And he points something at him, and he thinks that, he's dead. This guy's going to shoot him with an arrow or throw a spear at him, and it's over with, and they're going to take all his gear and leave him to die in the desert. But that's not what happens. He disappears, and he's looking around. Where did he go? And he comes back a while later with some other Indians with him. And this medicine man hops off his horse and goes back like this, and he's all scared. He thinks he's going to get tomahawked or killed, but he doesn't. He reaches and grabs out some herbs, and he takes the palm of his hand and rubs these herbs into his stomach and works it. He said he started getting just a little bit of relief, but he was still just ready to pass out at any moment. And the other Indians that came with him, you know, he's thinking, this is it. This is the end. They're going to take my gear, my gun, all my gear, and I'm a goner. And they don't. They throw him up on the back of the horse, roughshod. They just throw him up there and give him put all his gear hanging on the horse. And the Indian that first spotted him starts walking his horse at a real slow pace, and he just talks about how much agony he was in. He was just barely conscious this whole time. But this Indian traveled the distance. Now, the interesting thing is the date of this is December 24th. It's Christmas Eve. So he gets to the outside of the camp, and now there's pickets all the way around the camp, and the Indian didn't want to get shot by accident, so he got him within crawling distance of the pickets. He let him down on the ground with his gear, and then he rode off, and Matthew Caldwell was able to crawl the distance to where the picket could see him, and then they helped him into camp. And the next morning was Christmas morning. And the interesting thing is, there is a place out there in the desert, it's called Christmas Camp, and that's where the Mormon Battalion camped. Now, before I discovered some of the details of this story, I had actually taken my son there, and we'd camped in a father and son's camp out. Didn't even know it. But that's where he was able to rest that next day, Christmas Day, and so he could survive and not die in the desert. And because the Indians were so kind, they brought the battalions a bunch of watermelons, and he was able to eat some of that and get some of his color back, but he still couldn't walk. And back then, from what I understand, having the physician treat you would be worse than dying of dysentery or anything else, because they were so harsh to the men and what they did to them. So he didn't want anything to do with the physician, so he hid that whole day from the physician, and the next day he was able to get a ride on one of the officer's saddles. The officer was kind enough to hop down and let him do it, so he was able to stay away from the physician until he was good enough to walk a few days later. So that is my Christmas miracle. I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, and I want to thank the Pima people for saving my family. And that is another mystery of the Superstition Mountains.
Thank you for watching this episode of Mysteries of the Superstition Mountains.